Hello everyone, this is Alex and welcome to Burton Lamb, where we discuss all things Tim Burton. And, you know, out of all the Tim Burton movies to adapt to a musical, Big Fish seems like the oddest choice, but at the same time, the perfect choice.
I've covered the stage adaptations of Edward Scissorhands the ballet and Beetlejuice the musical, and it's not like his other films can't suit the stage. Nightmare Before Christmas is a full-on musical, Corpse Bride has songs in them, and hell, he even adapted a well-known musical, Sweeney Todd, to the screen. But there's something about Big Fish that seemed unusual. Big Fish, a novel of mythic proportions written by Daniel Wallace, was adapted to film in 2003, and while it's not the most well known or most talked about among Burton's filmography, the ones who have seen it argue it is one of his best among Edward Scissorhands or Ed Wood, and I can certainly see why. The story centres around the life of Edward Bloom and his estranged relationship with his son William. Throughout his childhood and well into his adult life, William is told stories of his father that seem very fantastical and not at all logical. Giants, witches, staying in bed for 3 years, a mysterious hidden town, and using his wedding ring to catch a big fish. Now, with his father on his deathbed, William is desperate to know who Edward Bloom really is. I think what makes this a particularly strong film for Burton is that it comes from his own experiences with his own father, Bill Burton. The filmmaker always felt estranged from both his parents, and in 2000 his father passed away. Coming across the screenplay for Big Fish, he thought it would be his way to express his personal emotions towards the passing of his father. It marked a change for him, as it was treading new territory, as while there were plenty of fantasy elements, there was a grounded reality with audiences were not used to with his films. Granted, there was Ed Wood, based on a real-life person, but let's say the character of Ed and the supporting cast weren't necessarily part of the grounded crowd. But that's a story for another time. The musical first appeared in 2013, but only lasted on Broadway for a few months. Eventually, it's been finding audiences overseas and seems to be coming out of hiding as years go by. I managed to see a production at Edinburgh's Fringe Festival, so I believe I may have seen an abridged version, so my review will be a take on that. So what may have appeared on Broadway, there may be a few differences.
In all honesty, compared to the Edward Scissorhands ballet and Beetlejuice the musical, Big Fish seems the one that stays closest to the movie. But this is no surprising, as the book for the musical was written by the same person who did the screenplay for the movie, John August. But having that said, the way it was staged was pretty clever.
It may seem small, but I like how Senior Edward's bed was always on stage, so it felt like he was always there telling his stories as they play out. The limitation of the stage helped to make the story seem both small and intimate, but also that blurred line between reality and fiction. In fact, the most sets I saw, or at least the ones that had the most detail, were the places in the present time, whether in William's childhood room or Edward's private hospital room. It reminded me a lot of the Studio Ghibli film Only Yesterday, where the scenes in the present were crisp, clear animation, but the flashbacks had blurred backgrounds, as memories are never exactly as they were.
As far as the story elements are concerned, there are a few major differences between film and stage, so let's get into those.
Now, it's been a very long time since I've read the book, so I'm just going off of memory, but the first big difference I noticed was the story of the witch. In the movie, Edward and his friends as children try to get hold of a glass eye that belongs to a witch. This eye will reveal to whoever looks at it how they are going to die. Edward sees for himself, but doesn't tell a soul on how it happens, so in the present he just says that he knows, and this isn't the time. In the book, I cannot remember a witch specifically, but Edward does tell people he knows when he's going to die. The only connection we have to the witch character is from a landlady who had her glass eye stolen, but Edward gives it back to her and she frightens the thieves as revenge. However, in the musical, they bring back the idea of a witch, but instead of a glass eye, it's just a crystal bowl that is stolen, and it's just used to tell your future. It just so happens that Edward sees how he'll die, as he wants to know after giving the crystal bowl back. This might be a nitpick, but I feel like it diminishes a bit of the mystical element from having a very specific item tell one specific event to something a little bit more generic.
Like, imagine hearing this story as a kid. Which one sounds more appealing to you? And then the children found themselves at the witch's house. This witch, apparently, kept a glass eye in her drawer. This eye, when you look into it, will tell you how you're gonna die. Or, and then the children approached the witch's house. This witch, apparently, kept a crystal ball that would tell you your future. The former does seem a little bit more unique, didn't it?
Second, while Edward does see the love of his life, Sandra Templeton, at the circus, like in the movie, in this one, Sandra is auditioning to run away with the circus, and as time stops, it's both that lock eyes. I like how this shows Sandra's slight desire to break out of her mundane life, which makes her seem like a good match for Edward, but then it doesn't make that much sense why she still ends up going to college and gets engaged to Don Price, who, if you remember, was Edward's rival in his childhood home of Ashton. But still, a really nice song, and so I'm okay with that little moment. The third one that I was most curious about going in was the story of Jenny Hill, as this is where the movie changed an element of the book that many thought was one of the best choices in the adaptation process. If you recall, Edward comes across a strange town called Spectre, where it seems peaceful, but no one ever leaves. The mayor's daughter, Jenny, befriends Edward, but when he is determined to leave, she asks him to promise to return to Spectre. Years and years later, Edward does return, but it is not the same, as the town was discovered by more and more people, and so capitalism took over, with most of the businesses going bankrupt. Edward ends up buying the town and tries to restore it, and comes across an older Jenny. After fixing her disheveled house, she tries to show her affection towards him, but he rejects her, stating that his wife is the only woman for him.
Well, in the book, he actually has an affair with Jenny, and even buys her a house and live together, so he pretty much does have that second life that Will was so afraid of in the film. So I was wondering which direction were they gonna go in the stage one? And kind of both?
In this version, Jenny was his high school sweetheart, and the town Edward saves is his childhood home, Ashton, or at least saves the civilians as the town is to be flooded. So he buys acres of land to build a new town and a new house for Jenny. At first, he falls for her affections, but then realizes his mistake and declares his love for his wife and leaves Jenny brokenhearted. However, this leads to the same reaction from William hearing this story, as he realizes that not only did his father truly love his mother, but also was a true hero saving an entire town, and that there may be some truth to his stories.
The last major difference, unfortunately, is a big one, and that is the ending of the story.
I'm not saying the ending was bad. It pretty much plays out like in the movie, where Edward asks William to tell him what the witch saw, i.e. how he was going to die. Will was never told this story, but tries to go along with it anyway, and tells his father that they escape the hospital and arrive at the river where everyone in Edward's life is waiting. Don't get me wrong, it gets me emotional with a very bittersweet song of saying goodbye while celebrating his life, but I realised there was one thing missing, one small element that seemed to affect the whole scene. There was no big fish. If you recall, at the end of the scene in the movie, Edward becomes the big fish, as that was what he always was, with William finally understanding who his father really is.
In fact, now that I'm thinking of it, I don't even remember there being a big fish.
The only connection was a story of doing a certain dance that is the best bait to use while fishing. Again, this might be because I saw an abridged version, but even if it was, why cut that particular part, especially as it's the title of the story? This maybe is why I didn't get quite as emotional as I did with the movie. Now, that's not to say that there weren't any emotional moments. To me, the scenes that made me tearful was surrounding Edward and Sandra's relationship. There's a moving song called I Don't Need a Roof that Sandra sings as Edward is scared he's leaving her with so much left undone. It really speaks to anyone who has gone through the death of a partner, as you can see from both parties, and it really was the most realistic and grounded moment in the play. It was like the musical equivalent of Sandra saying her farewell to Edward in the hospital in the movie. It was simple, and that's all that it needs to be. The other was when Edward tries to meet Sandra at university after the circus. You might remember the grand gesture he makes, filling the whole area with Sandra's favourite flowers, daffodils. Of course, for a musical adaptation, there would be a song with this proclamation of love, but that's not what got me. As I mentioned, during the whole show, while the stories are happening, we see the older Edward lying in the hospital bed, observing the whole scene, being invested and remembering important parts of his life. While the song Daffodils is playing, the older Sandra is sitting next to Edward, and both actors start singing to both Sandras, handing them a bouquet of daffodils. As though the older couple are reenacting the moment they decided to be together for the rest of their lives. That was a beautiful way to show this scene on stage. This had the best blend of reality and fantasy that Big Fish excels at.
So in my opinion, I think it's a great adaptation. Is it flawless? No, but is it a musical that deserves more attention? Yes, I think so. Because the mixture of light and dark, reality and fantasy, there's always something that can tap into a member of the audience. Much like the movie, it's a celebration of life, and it does it in a way that can communicate to theatre audiences. So in my honest opinion, I think this is the best stage adaptation of a Tim Burton movie I've seen so far. Will there be any others in the future? Who knows? Only time will tell. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope to see you back in Burton Land soon. Take care.